Richard I, Richard the Lionheart, spent less than a year of his reign in England because in 1119, as one of the leaders of the Third Crusade, he set out for the Holy Land. When he died in 1199, his brother John became king. John had two nicknames, Lackland, which means has no land, and Softword, which means unsuccessful in war. In order to get more money to defend his French possessions, King John collected higher taxes. The barons, the church, and the general population were exposed to his violent abuse of power. He seized land without process of law, imposed arbitrary taxes, and collected money from widows by threatening them with a forced remarriage if they didn't pay. The barons, knights, clergy, and townspeople organized a rebellion and asked the king to sign Magna Charta, a charter demanding specific liberties. The king signed it at Runnymede in 1215. When John died in 1216, his 9-year-old son was crowned as Henry III. Magna Charta was issued again in its final version in 1225. The Palace of Westminster and a new Westminster Abbey were built. In 1258, the barons, led by the king's brother-in-law Simon de Montfort, demanded that Henry summon a great council of lords and bishops to help him decide all important matters. In 1261, the king renounced the agreement and civil war broke out. In a final battle of Evesham in 1265, Simon was killed. Henry III was succeeded by his son Edward I, who respected the terms of Magna Charta, and in 1295 convoked a council made up of barons, clergy, knights, and representatives of the towns. This was known as the Model Parliament, England's first parliament. Edward I conquered Wales and tried to win Scotland as well, but was opposed by Scottish hero William Wallace. Then Edward II succeeded his father in 1307, but was deposed by his wife, Queen Isabella. Their 14-year-old son was crowned Edward III. In 1337, Edward III claimed the crown of France because his mother was the French king's sister. This was the beginning of the 100 Years' War, which was to last until 1453. There was another reason for the war. The French were threatening Flanders, which was the chief market for English wool. King Edward III introduced the idea of chivalry, a name given to a set of values, bravery, loyalty, honesty, and glory, which the perfect knight had to respect, and which was linked to the cycle of Arthurian legends. It was Edward who founded the Order of the Garter. It was formed of a group of 24 knights, the same number the legendary Arthur had chosen, with high ideals of honor and service. They met once a year on St. George's Day at Windsor Castle, where King Arthur's Round Table was supposed to have been. The 100 Years' War was interrupted in 1348 by a terrible plague which spread through Europe and killed more than 1/3 of Britain's population. In 1377, Edward III died, and the crown passed to his 10-year-old grandson, Richard II. And during the first years of Richard II's reign, England was actually ruled by his uncle John of Gaunt, who became very unpopular when he introduced the poll tax, which was a tax imposed on every adult without reference to their income. Riots broke out all over the land. It was the beginning of the Peasants' Revolt. A craftsman called Wat Tyler gathered a huge crowd of people and marched on London to ask the king to abolish the peasants' duties to their landlords. The young king agreed to meet the rebels and listen to their demands, but the mayor of London had Tyler killed, and Richard II cried to the peasants, "I will be your captain." However, the king did nothing and had the leaders of the revolt executed. After the peasants' revolt, Richard II imposed heavy taxes and ignored Parliament. Eventually, his cousin, Henry, Duke of Lancaster, led an uprising against him with the support of many nobles. In 1399, Richard surrendered the throne to Henry IV, who became the first Lancastrian king of England. His son, Henry V, who succeeded him in 1413, would become one of the most popular kings in the English history. He believed he had a right to the French throne, so he renewed the war against France, which culminated with his triumph in the Battle of Agincourt. He died in 1422, leaving an infant son, Henry VI, and England was ruled by a council of nobles. When Henry was old enough to rule, he suffered from mental illness. Richard, Duke of York, was chosen to rule England as regent until the king recovered in 1455. At this point, the rivalry, the conflict between the two families of York and Lancaster developed into a civil war known as the Wars of the Roses. The Wars of the Roses last for 30 years, from 1355 to 1485. The name came from symbols of the two royal families. The House of York had a white rose as its symbol, while the House of Lancaster had a red rose. The conflict between the families was caused by several factors. First of all, they had equal claim to the throne, as both were direct descendants of King Edward III. Then, the nobles advising the ruling Lancastrian king, Henry VI, were very, very unpopular. It was a time of general unrest and discontent. There were a number of powerful lords who had their own private armies at their personal command, and Henry VI was considered to be mentally unstable. So the civil war finally ended when Richard III, the last Yorkist king, was defeated and killed at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485 by the Lancastrian Henry Tudor, founder of the House of Tudor. Henry married Elizabeth of York, Edward the Fourth's daughter, thus unifying the two roses, and became king as Henry VII.